Well, welcome back to Conversations in the Wild. Tim Lukai here. So glad that you guys have continued to tune in. We're so grateful to all our listeners. So thank you very, very much. Continue to share and like and follow the podcast. I'm really excited for today's episode with Fred Stoeker. Fred is the founder of a nonprofit ministry called Living True Ministries, and he is co-authored Every Man's Battle series, which has impacted literally millions. Over 4 million people have bought the book Every Man's Battle. And Fred has written more than a dozen other books that have challenged men and women to sexual purity and to stay connected in a genuine, intimate relationship. And so he's become a popular speaker and author, and he is a true pioneer in the area of helping men break free from any unhealthy sexual behavior. And that can be a lot of different things, but we know the most common is every man's battle in the area of pornography. So we do talk about this in today's episode. For those younger listeners, perhaps, just know that the content is a little bit more PG-13. But this is an incredible episode for any of those people listening that need help in this area or know someone that needs help in this area. And Fred is definitely an expert and has written lots of content in helping men break free and understanding that this is, in fact, every man's battle, and staying pure and recognizing our need for intimacy and connection. And that goes well beyond sex. That is a connection that is deeper, much deeper. And Fred has great tools and practical wisdom, and I'm super grateful to have him on the podcast today. Thanks for tuning in, and enjoy today's podcast. Thank you for tuning in to Conversations in the Wild. I'm excited for today's guest. We have Fred Stoeker. Did I say Stoeker right? Or how do I say
sure
that?
Did. No, that's right on the money.
Fred Stoeker. Awesome. I love using the word stoke or stoked because I'm born and raised here in Newport Beach, California. So anytime I can get stoked is a good thing. So it's good having Fred Stoeker.
Well, I'll do my best.
Oh, you're going to do great. And of course, we have Justin Herman here. We're going to have a great conversation. And Fred is, I'm going to let him do some of the intro, but he's written a couple amazing books. One of them is pretty new. I believe it's called Battle On, Battle Over. But Correct. His most recognizable book is Every Man's Battle, which he co-wrote with Stephen Arterburn. Did I say that right? And sold over 1 million copies. And that book kind of just ignited this whole kind of, movement of, getting guys to break free from some of the unhealthy sexual behavior like pornography. And, that's a definite epidemic that we experience today with men in particular. And it is very toxic. Not only we've known that it's obviously toxic in a marriage, but one of the things that we're learning more and more as research coming out, it actually ruins our brain and can cause some major mental health issues, which is obviously a hot topic in today's culture. So I'm excited to have Fred on. And Fred, I would love for you to kind of just open up and share a little bit of your story and how you came to the day where you're like, man, I need to write a book about this.
Yeah, I mean, I had gotten to the place in my marriage where I could tell that, my sexual sin was impacting our relationship. And my wife's name is Brenda, and I just loved her to death. And I just felt like something had to be done. And even then, I mean, I had already taken care of the actual pornography, like the magazines and all that sort of a thing. But I mean, my eyes were still completely out of control. If I'm in a parking lot and there's a couple of girls in short shorts going by, I'm staring on the beach. Even a billboard that's racy, I'll be staring at that and lusting. So, I mean, it was a lot of times we think of those things and we think that they're small and that they don't really matter. But when I began to cut those things out of my life, it had a big impact on my relationship with Brenda. It literally reignited our relationship in many ways. So the big thing is I had always thought that marriage would take care of the sexual sin issue, because we all think that once we start having regular sex with our wives, that's somehow going to become nirvana and magic. That's not how it was for me, and that's not how it is for most men at all. So I just had to either fight this battle and win, or just basically give up and say, for the rest of my life, I'm just not going to have that connection with my wife that God intends. So I fought the battle against all odds. I won. And then I started to teach it in my church. And I'd always have guys come up to me maybe 5-6 weeks later after I taught, and they'd kind of sidle up to me and whisper in my ear and say, that stuff you taught about a few weeks ago, I could really relate to it, and the things you taught me really helped me. Well, after a while, people began saying, you need to write a book. And I used to just take that as sort of kind of flattery. And then I started having a few pastors say it. And, I always hold pastors in high esteem. So eventually I just thought, it's been 10 years since I won my battle. I haven't seen anybody else write a book that's practical. So I guess maybe I should. And so I began to write it. And it's a long story, so I won't get into all of it. But as soon as I got the manuscript done and edited, Waterbrook Press, they were the first company we showed it to, and they said, we love it. And really the rest is history. I did not expect to be an author. I certainly did not expect to be writing on sex, of all things. But it's turned out to be a great ministry, and it's allowed me to really help men. I have all kinds of emails from people that have been set free after reading Every Man's Battle, and it's just been an exciting life ever since.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that, Justin. It looks like you have a question.
Yeah, because the thing you said really pinged me. I feel like, and I can't remember the moment it happened, but I felt like there was a vibe when I was younger where pastors or just people who were trying to help would tell young men to kind of, keep it in your pants. And when you get married, it'll all be, it'll all be fine when you're married. And I feel like I remember being told that, like being sold that idea that it's like, hey, stay pure, don't screw around. And when you get married, it's going to be like a sex castle. You're going to love it. Right. And obviously that I've been married 10 years. Let me be honest. It is not a sex castle.
No.
But in Christian culture, that disservice was done somewhere. And I'm hoping that I'm not crazy, that you could speak to maybe some of what I think maybe Christian men have heard over the years.
Yeah, I wasn't saved till I was 23. Okay. So I wasn't raised Christian. And so I was never in a place where a pastor might say that to me, but it just literally makes sense, right? I mean, you spend all your time before your wedding day trying to not have sex, and so that you can eventually get married and then have all the sex that you want. The one thing that we never really understand is that sex is not a one-way street, that we as men just get to decide when we have sex and when we don't. There's also a woman involved, and she has her own taste. She has her own desires. She has her own emotions, and all those have to match up. And then kids come along, and that always throws a little bit of a curveball into it. Everybody's constantly tired. And so it just isn't that way. And probably one of my favorite things about finding sexual purity was that I was a much better husband and father because I had control of my sexuality. It didn't own me, I owned it. And so if Brenda was really tired, I could literally just say, okay, we'll wait. And it wasn't frustrating. It wasn't painful. It didn't make me feel rejected or anything like that. I owned my sexuality. And I think of all the things I like to teach that, because for most of us in this culture, our sexuality owns us, and we are slaves to our sexuality, and we can't say no. And I don't see how we can ever be totally free and able to serve God in fullness until we can say, no, I own my sexuality. That's when we really get the freedom we need to serve God, serve our wives, serve our kids in the ways we need to.
Yeah, one of the things you said that I think is kind of a good thing to connect on is you said, well, it came to the point where I would pursue my wife, and she was tired, and so you had no frustration and were able to say, okay, I'll wait. I'm still learning how that works, and I'm sure Justin is too, where you can not be a little bit bummed out and go, man, it's been a while. That would have been awesome. Um, because I mean, and I don't find myself to be someone that is battling to break free from the stronghold of pornography. So I'm just curious about that. Like, how did you get to the point where it's like, all right, no worries, we'll try again tomorrow?
Well, one of the ways that we talk about it in Every Man's Battle is to learn to bounce your eyes away from the sensual things in your environment. And I'm going to get to answering your question here in a minute, but one of the things that we know from research from all the way back in the 1950s is that men and women are different in the way that our eyes work when it comes to our sexuality. For men, we're extremely visual, and just by staring at a girl, we can actually literally get our engines going so much that we're starting to prepare for intercourse in terms of how our mind is working and how our body is responding. And one of the things I found is that, like I said earlier, I had, already tackled the porn thing just like you, Tim, but it was all of the so-called little things that I began to cut out of my life. The girls in the parking lot, the girls on the beach, all those things I mentioned. And one of the things I found is that when we are literally following scripture, which is Ephesians 5:3, which the Apostle Paul says we are not to have even a hint of sexual immorality in our lives. What that really means is we're not to be getting any sexual gratification in our lives from anything or anybody but our wives. And I actually took that literally. I know a lot of people don't. A lot of people would look at me and go, gosh, you're being too tight there. But if you look at the original Greek, I'm not being too tight. And then if you look at what happened in my life, I'm not stirring up my sexuality heavily all day long. In the book, we call it what I would call bowls of sexuality. It's just a metaphor, but if I'm getting, say, 5 bowls, say I'm supposed to get 10 bowls of sexuality a day in my mind, and I'm getting half of it filled through women, through lust, through staring at joggers, whatever it might be, even masturbating. One of the things I found is that once I began to have my entire sexuality only met by Brenda, and I cut those other things out, my engines weren't always on a low idle, and I wasn't, so that when I would get to the end of the day and I might make a move on Brenda, but I'm just too tired, whatever. I didn't already have my engines going because of other things I saw that day. And I wasn't all stirred up to the point where, oh gosh, now I have to somehow find a way to stop where these engines are going. And so I ended up teaching my sons the same thing. And, my oldest son got all the way to his wedding altar without ever masturbating or being hooked on porn. My younger son, he's 31. He's still living that way. He's not married yet. But my point is this isn't just me. I mean, I taught my sons that. I've taught other men that. And the men that are actually following that fully, the teachings that Steve and I taught in Every Man's Battle, it gives them the freedom to be able to hear that no from their wives and not be frustrated. I don't know what's going on in your life. I also know other men are built with different levels of testosterone and all these other things, not trying to say one thing or the other. But you asked me the question of what happened in my life, and that's sort of how it worked out.
Has anyone ever said, "Hey, Fred, you're wrong. They're guys. They're married. They should get it when they want it." Like, has anyone ever pushed back on the underlying message of every man's battle.
Well, of course, and it's absurd because one of the things that Steve and I took a lot of pride in is that we worked very hard to make that book very biblical. And the fact of the matter is, God is very clear that if we're going to stay free, we're going to have to flee sexual immorality. Like, for instance, Paul saying in 1 Corinthians 6:18, flee sexual immorality. Why? Because this sin is different from other sins. It locks us in. It takes over our body. It almost sounds like he's talking about addiction there, even though he doesn't use the word. And then I already mentioned Ephesians 5:3. And then I could list off more where Paul and Peter, the Apostle John, they're talking about, making every effort to remain free and to remain blameless before Christ. And when you look at those scriptures, it's our responsibility. None of those guys are saying, sit there until the Holy Spirit comes in and makes you pure enough that you can walk purely in this world. Every last one of them said, no, this is your responsibility. You can't do it without the Holy Spirit, but you need to make that choice to be blameless and to find purity. So I don't know scripturally how you could ever say that, Fred, you're wrong. And then the wildest thing is the things we've been learning, as Tim mentioned earlier, the things we're learning about the human brain over the last 20 years. I mean, I didn't even know that stuff when the book came out in the year 2000. And now we've written the 20th anniversary version of Every Man's Battle, and we've included so much brain study stuff now in the newest version. And it's incredible the rewriting that happens in the brain, the neural pathways. Literally, men have two sexual gratification centers in the brain. The one is the one where when you have sex with a wife, that peaceful feeling you have and that connection you feel. And the other one has to do with how you feel as you're anticipating getting on the computer and looking at your porn sites, and that anticipation and that lust. What happens is that first pleasure center is supposed to be the primary one, but as we're looking at porn over time, it rewrites it so that that second one becomes our primary pleasure center. And what happens is that you then need that really heavy lust kind of intensity to get your sexuality going. And that's one of the reasons why we have a big ED epidemic in America among 20-year-olds and 30-year-olds right now. That should be impossible because of hormones, but it's not. Because of pornography, we're rewriting our brains so that it's almost impossible to have sex with a genuine woman, flesh and blood.
So, I mean, ED, erectile dysfunction.
Yeah.
You're talking about something I actually recently heard on a different podcast about how 20s and 30s more than ever are having these major issues with getting an erection due to probably the porn epidemic. Is that what you're insinuating?
Oh, no, I don't think that it'd be pretty hard to argue that it's not the porn epidemic. And this is why, Tim. These guys have no trouble getting an erection when they're sitting in front of their computer. None. It's when they're with a genuine woman. And let me explain to you how that works. So when you're with a woman, she is not tied to your neural system. She's not tied to your nervous system, right? I mean, she's a separate individual. She's doing things to you to get you heated up, and you're doing things to her. Okay, but she can't read what you need her to do next to take you to the next level of intensity. Okay. However, when you are with your computer, you know what you need to do to take your body to the next level of intensity, because everything you're looking at is tied into your nervous system. Your hand that you're using to stimulate yourself is tied into your nervous system. And what happens is you can then bounce to the next computer screen to take you to the next level, or you can bounce to the next image. You can do the perfect thing with your hand that you need to do to take you to the next level of intensity. And so your whole sexuality becomes very well tuned to intensity instead of connection. And so everything you do with your sexuality when you're in porn is tied to taking you to higher levels of intensity. And then when you then get into bed with a woman, she no longer has a ticket to ride. I mean, you can't, every time you need intensity to increase, she fails. She can't possibly know what needs to be done. And it becomes very frustrating. The erection, if it started, goes away and you just can't get anywhere. That's generally how it works. And when you look at some of the brain studies, it makes a lot of sense that ED is tied to pornography use. And then when you look at the fact that if you look at the timeline of pornography and the timeline of when the ED epidemic began, you can see there's a tie-in between when streaming pornography became more and more available, and then when the ED started to pick up in the 20 and 30 somethings.
It's fascinating. Yeah, I was saying that in the article I was reading that essentially college boys are now having to take a supplement to help with ED, and which is why there's more and more brands coming out to support erectile dysfunction. So just unfortunate information. But let's talk back. Let's step back into the brain stuff, because I think that is pretty fascinating with the tie. Because there's definitely probably a misconception that porn is helpful. It makes us feel good. It helps us get that gratification that we need as men. But yet we're learning more and more. You began talking about the neuropathways and negative neuropathways, positive neuropathways. I'd love for you to share a little bit about what you've learned and studied in the way of mental health and just how toxic it can be.
Okay, well, one of the things that I like about having lived kind of in purity for 30 years or more is that I've learned some things that I don't think I would have been able to learn any other way. Because like you mentioned, people talk about porn being the thing that kind of gets our engines going. And so, we might even watch it with our wives and, we get our engines going and then we turn and we have sex with our wives, whatever. I get that. But there was a Bible verse, I think it's in Proverbs, where I think it was David talking to Solomon, but whatever. What we're talking about is that we are to take joy in the wife of our youth and to take pleasure in her breasts only. How many guys do you know that just take pleasure in their wife's breast? No breasts at the beach, no breasts in the parking lot, none. I mean, that's a pretty rare thing, and yet that's a command that we have. And what I used to think that meant when I was young was, oh man, when I get older, I'm going to have to grit my teeth and really obey God to take joy in my wife's 80-year-old breasts, right? Because they're going to be hanging, they're not going to be full, they're going to be different. And so I always figured, okay, this is just one of those commands that God commands us to do, and we're going to have to grit our teeth. What I found out over time was something completely different. And it has to do with the brain, as you mentioned, Tim. What I noticed was that as my wife aged and as I aged, that my tastes literally changed to be attracted by Brenda's older body, heavier body, whatever it might be. There were two different situations in her life. One was when her mom died, and Brenda had kind of a nervous breakdown when she got the word that her mom was going to be dying. And she went from like 170 pounds to 126 pounds in a matter of 3 weeks. I mean, it just burned the weight off of her, that stress. And the wildest thing is that there was a night where I had woken up in the morning and I had looked over to the left and I saw Brenda standing there. And it was like, my instant reaction was, oh, I had an affair. I had an affair tonight, because she didn't look anything like Brenda, because she had lost weight so fast. And the interesting thing was, during that time, I had a pretty difficult time having sex with Brenda, because she had changed so much that my taste, she no longer fit my taste. She was more like a model, okay, but she was not fitting my taste, which had changed with her weight after the kids. And then there was another time where she started to have a thyroid issue, and she went up to 200 pounds. Then she lost that weight really quickly when she went on medication. That same thing happened. One of the things that the Lord had told me was that when we obey, the body he's given us is meant, if we would obey him and just take joy in her breasts and no other breasts, the body is meant to tie us close to our wives, even as they change over time. And what happens for most men is they don't allow that to happen in their lives. They keep looking at porn. They keep saying things like, just because I can't order doesn't mean I can't look at the menu. And so they're going to look at bodies, whatever they want to do. And so what happens for them, it's a different kind of erectile dysfunction. When they get up into their 50s, their wives no longer have 18, 24-year-old style breasts. They're so used to looking in them and having their sexuality tied to that, again, through mental pathway changes and all that, that they can't have sex with their wives anymore. Me, I can have just as powerful and as exciting sex with my wife now as I ever have been able to. And that's been true when she's 200 pounds or when she's 120. And so what I'm saying is that, you were talking about the brain. I believe that God has built some of these things right into us, that when we obey, we get that natural blessing of being able to be connected with our wives sexually our whole lives. Now, the reverse of that, of course, as I mentioned, is that if your tastes never change, you're essentially shooting yourself in the foot, and you're never going to be able to have the kind of sex life you want. And guess what? Your wife can sense that. And she can sense that you are thinking of the porn you were looking at today so that you can have sex with her, because her body isn't enough. And a lot of times older women, they stop having sex. They don't want it anymore because they can tell. And so I think that's one of the big issues that, maybe it didn't answer your question about toxicity quite as closely as maybe you were thinking. But I think it's very toxic what we do to ourselves, and we keep ourselves from being blessed by God in our sexuality as we age. I think that's a useful thing to know, especially because you have a lot of younger men that are listening to this podcast, and they need to understand what happens over time, not just what's going on in their 20s and 30s because of the porn, but what happens in their 40s, 50s, and 60s when they're not obeying God.
No, I think that's really helpful. I know that you obviously have traveled all over, I believe, the world talking about this, and
Yes.
obviously more here in the US, but the majority of that has been centered around Every Man's Battle. But I know you did just, if I'm not mistaken, release a new book, Battle Over Battle. And so I would love to hear more about this new book. And I don't think you co-authored it. I think this is just yours, correct?
Yeah, Brenda and I both together.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, we had a goal. We had a particular goal in mind for this book, where I really needed a female voice to speak to some of these issues. And every man's battle, as I mentioned earlier, had to do with guarding the eyes and starving the mind of lust. Basically, it's our kind of the first gate of sin into our sexuality. And you really need to defend that vulnerability if you expect to win the battle for purity. Over time, what I found out, and this was like, I got my eyes under control. And then over those next couple of years, what I noticed is that just getting my eyes under control wasn't 100% all I needed to do. And there's a second vulnerability, which in the book we call the stealth vulnerability, because most men never actually put two and two together when it comes to their sexuality. And what I found out was this: I was finding that not all sexual sin is sexual at its root. What I was finding was that I might be at my office late at night and I'd find myself masturbating there, even though my wife is only 6 blocks away in my home, and would say yes to sex if I drove there. And yet I found myself, even though I had a full-blown sex life and was completely satisfied, I was still masturbating, and I couldn't understand why. As I began to really study my life, two things occurred to me. One of them was that when my financial pressure was the most, and I was in full commission sales at the time, which means if you don't sell something, your kids don't eat. That's some of the most highest pressure I've ever had in my life. And when the financial pressure came, I would find myself masturbating to kind of relieve stress, I guess. And then also I had a bad relationship with my father. He never thought much of me as a man. He was a national champion wrestler in college and wanted me to wrestle, but all I did was play football. And he thought I was kind of a girly man for that. And so he just never accepted me as a man. And on the nights where I was really struggling with my manhood, like, can I really make it in this world of men and really sell anything, whatever? I found that I would masturbate, and it, I really feel like God brought it to my attention. And look, not all sexual sin is sexual at its root. You've got to deal with these issues, non-sexual issues, in the right way if you expect to stay sexually pure. Yes, I was masturbating. I was using my sexual apparatus, but the root of it wasn't that at all. And so I learned how to take my financial stress to the Lord in prayer and intercession. And I learned to take, I kind of replaced my dad in my mind as my father. I replaced my dad with my Heavenly Father, and began to really work on worshiping God one-on-one at home, reading my Bible, praying more. And that intimacy grew. And again, then I didn't need the masturbation to medicate my pain. I was already getting, true, genuine intimacy with God doing those other things. And so what I call the stealth vulnerability is simply this, is that there are a lot of sexual or non-sexual issues in our lives that drive us to masturbate and medicate those emotional issues in our lives. And a lot of men never put two and two together. So they spend their lives saying, oh, I'm a rotten Christian. I'm a pervert. I can never get over this. I'm just terrible. No, you're not terrible. You're not a pervert. You're none of those things. You have some father wounds that you need to deal with. You have some financial stress you need to deal with. These are just things that all men need to learn how to deal with. So don't beat yourself over the head. Get after it, get close to God, and take care of these things. So when we talk about that second book, this newest book, Battle On, Battle Over, we deal a lot with that second vulnerability. But we don't stop there. We also know that we're living in a time, the first tsunami wave of female porn addiction. There's never been a time like there is now where women are hooked on porn. And so Brenda has written to women about their porn addiction. And then the third thing is that we have found over time is that every man's battle is actually best fought as couples. And so it's really every couple's battle. So Brenda spends probably 6 chapters talking to women and wives about how they can help fight this battle with their husbands and make it more likely to win. I can make this declaration really easy. When I work with husbands on their purity issues and their wives join us in the discussions, I have almost 100% success rate in getting men out of their sexual sin. But if the wives say something like this is your problem, I don't want anything to do with it, this is dirty, I can't stand it, less than 50% chance of getting them out of their sexual sin. So we really felt like we wanted to write a book that addressed that. And we feel really good about the way we addressed it.
Awesome. And this, I know Every Man's Battle has a workbook and curriculum, but does this new Battle Over Battle book have that as well for couples to go through together or guys to go through as groups? How does it best work?
Yeah, Brenda didn't really join me in this part. I don't like writing workbooks, okay? So it was a really hard, but it's easily the best workbook I've ever put together. And it's online at battleonbattleover.com. And it's a free download. So
cool.
First of all, any guy can go on there and download it for himself. Any woman can do it for herself. Great thing is they can do it as couples, but one of the things we're hoping, when Every Man's Battle came out, there was kind of a brush fire movement of men's groups going through the book. At the time, it was about the only book out there. So it was a really good thing. We're hoping that church groups will do the same thing with this book, only this time, not just men's groups, with maybe couples groups. One of the things we found in these 30 years of working in this ministry is that wives a lot of times don't want to admit that their husbands are having sexual sin issues with anyone else. And so a lot of times wives won't go in a couples group because they just feel creepy about admitting what their husband is actually doing. The trouble is that there's so much of this going on, and men need their wives so much that we're just hoping that and praying that'll happen more and more.
Yeah, that's something that I have found being a men's pastor here in Southern California at Mariners is we offered a group kind of specifically. Originally, it was kind of marketed, for guys who are hooked on porn. But the reality is this curriculum really was not about that. It's a 10-week curriculum. It's called Rogue Intimacy. And the reality was it wasn't throwing Band-Aids at the porn vice. It was actually going for the deeper root cause, which was intimacy. And as a result of that, the curriculum kind of studies, and you go through with a group of men, incredible transformational experience. But what's neat about it is it really talks about the different types of intimacy, and one being a sexual intimacy that's needed for us, both men and women. But really, there's multiple forms of intimacy that we as men and women need. And so it was really kind of going through that and helping guys break free from porn. But the reality is some of the lack of intimacy can be different vices for depending on the guy. It could be sexual addiction, it could be alcohol addiction, and so on. So, but what we found was we made a mistake. We marketed the curriculum centered around porn, and no one wanted to join. And the other thing that happened was guys who knew that they wanted to break free, kind of like your story, Fred, is they were like, man, I can't sign up for this because I don't want my wife to look it up on the internet, on the website, and find that it's a class specifically for guys who struggle with porn, and then I'll get caught. And so we had to rethink the entire thing. And
Sure.
Actually it took a couple years to unwind the marketing of quote unquote the porn curriculum or the porn class, when in reality there's one chapter of 10 that discusses unhealthy sexual behavior, not only porn, but lust and all the different types of, wherever the lust spectrum can take you. Some can go way beyond just pornography, unfortunately. But anyway, I think that's where it's a little bit tricky to help guys break free from this, because there's a lot of guilt and shame centered around the topic, not only for the wife who doesn't want to admit or share that her husband struggles with that, but most certainly for the men who are like, they don't want to be seen as, it's an addiction that I deal with, or a vice, and a bad habit that I deal with. So that's something that we want to continue to push forward in helping guys break free and find freedom from. And shame and guilt doesn't make it any easier.
No. And in fact, I know that when I taught my sons about this, I mean, I was 100% keeping shame out of it, because I don't believe that shame should have anything to do with this. I mean, I know we often look at sexual sin as shameful, like a creepy guy sitting next to his computer in the dark, masturbating, okay? But the fact is like I mentioned earlier, a lot of times what that is a guy struggling with father wounds or a lack of intimacy. He might be dealing with a lack of connection with people, doesn't have any friends, for instance, he's lonely. You can deal with that with sexual sin, feel better in the moment. And the same thing is true, with my manhood issues, whatever it might be. So in Battle On, Battle Over, we do talk about intimacy. You see, an orgasm gives you the feeling of connection because of the way the chemistry works. And so you've got this false intimacy that you're using to kind of make up for the fact that you don't have genuine intimacy in your life. And that's just the last thing you really want to do. What's better is to have that interpersonal relationship with God. That's genuine intimacy. Deep friendship with your wife, that's genuine intimacy. Guys that maybe go through a curriculum like the one you talked about, they form deep intimacy. All of these different forms of intimacy will work against that second vulnerability, that one I mentioned earlier, the stealth vulnerability. Anytime you can get genuine intimacy, it helps to defend you from that, that need for false intimacy and that brokenness in your heart you feel from the lack of connection.
That's good.
So you're 100% right. And we've addressed it again in Battle On, Battle Over, but just from a little different standpoint. I do talk heavily about 3 chapters training people how to find that intimacy with God, because I feel like to say, look, you need intimacy, but not to teach guys how to do it, that's a mistake. I mean, they really need to know. I mean, a lot of guys don't know how. And so we're really pleased with being able to step forward and help with that.
Well, you've done some great work. I know that many guys all over the country and world have been recipients of your books and your work. So thank you for the amazing work that you do. And some of it is just, I think, for us men to recognize the problem, recognize the harm, not only in some of the brain and mental health, but the destruction of family, the destruction of marriages. It's just absolutely tearing the family units apart. And I think we just have to recognize that as men. And then the thing that you've talked about a couple times is like the father wounds, maybe it's not even a father wound. I'm sure that's probably top, just wounds of childhood or whatever,
Yes,
trauma, pains. But you kept saying you got to do the work. You got to do the work. I'm going to translate to our listeners. You got to do the work. A couple different things that I think is that you mean. One, you need to do the work on probably getting some counseling and therapy. And I always, one of my personal goals is to normalize therapy for men. Normalize honestly, therapy for anyone, but
Yes.
normalize it for men in particular, because there's still unfortunately such a stigma. I work with men and have for 7 years. And oftentimes I'll get into these hard conversations and I'll just say, man, one of the things you need to do is the hard work and get into counseling and therapy. Their immediate response is not, oh my gosh, you're so right, I can't wait. It's I don't, yeah, I don't need it. I don't need it. I'm not that, it's not that bad. I don't know if that would help. I mean, there's all sorts of reasons that men respond, or I don't have the money, therapy's expensive, and then I always have the rebuttal on, and what is more valuable of an investment, but becoming whole, healthy, and investing in your marriage and your family. And a lot of times there's therapists and Christian therapy that offers some sort of scholarships and help. I know there's several here in Orange County. All that being said is I want to reiterate the hard work that's needed to press in. If there's listeners that are struggling with these areas, that to press in and figure out what might need to be done. Maybe step one is pick up Every Man's Battle, or Battle on Battle Over, or perhaps it's connecting with someone in a peer that is someone that can help. Maybe that's a pastor, counselor, but get into therapy. And of course, as you've mentioned multiple times, Fred, is lean into what God can do to the spirit can break free from these addictions, from these vices, and press into what we can learn from God's word and in community and different groups that can help with this. There's so many resources now that can help guys through this, but step one is to take any form of action.
Taking action, Tim, is hard. I remember how long it took me to literally mean it when I said, I'm going to engage this battle. I mean, there were many times, in fact, before I was saved, I wanted out of porn so bad because the money it cost, but the shame it made me feel. Okay. So then I got saved, and of course you heard the story, but I remember the Lord in prayer once said this to me. It wasn't verbal or anything like that, but I heard it as if it was. And he basically said, are you going to be the one that's going to change the direction of your family tree? Meaning in regards to sexual sin, which was rampant all the way back. Are you going to be the one that's going to change the direction? Or are you going to leave it for someone better than you somewhere down the line? And what he meant was, by better than you, meaning someone that loves my purposes enough to actually go to battle and win this thing. It was still, after he challenged me on that, and I felt so broken by it, it still took me, a number of weeks before I'd literally engaged the battle, because it's a scary thought. Two things. Number one is, how am I going to live my life without my medication? My porn. Okay. And then number two is, can I really win this thing? I'm not sure I have what it takes. And so you got those two things going on, even as, you and I are saying we need to do the work. Well, to even step up and start that work, it's a frightening thing. I'm the first one to tell you, and here I've written this book about it all, but I mean, I'm the first one to tell you that was frightening to me. And so if you feel like, oh gosh, I could never do this, look, you're not alone. All of us, when we look at a daunting mountain that we have to climb, it's frightening. But at the same time, are you going to leave it for someone else that loves God's purposes better than you somewhere down the line? I know when I was challenged with that wasn't going to happen. I mean, I couldn't, in the end, I knew that my sons were going to need me to win, and God was going to need me to win in order to do the things in my life he wanted to do through us as a couple and as a family. So at some point, we can't just be concerned about our image or what people are thinking about us or that sort of a thing. We've literally got to get down and say, okay, stake in the ground. I don't move from this spot. And that's kind of the attitude that has to be taken. And then once you do that, you're not as unwilling to go to a counselor, right? You're not as unwilling because you have finally said, okay, I'm going to win. I'm going to do anything I have to do to win. Then you're not crossing your arms when someone like Tim says, look, I know a good counselor for you. You literally say to Tim instead, hey, thank you. I will call him first thing in the morning. And it's that kind of an attitude where you're literally listening to the Holy Spirit, listening to those around you, where you can finally start getting the help you need and break free.
So good. Well, thanks for changing the trajectory of your family tree and inspiring so many to do the same and put that stake in the ground and take that first action step to break free from this. This is such an important topic in today's culture, as it is ruining many, many men's lives and their families and their marriages. So I encourage those guys. We will link Fred's books and resources for you guys to step in and take a look at some of this great content to break free. But Fred, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us.
Thank you, Tim and Justin. Great questions earlier. Sorry if I talked too much there at the end and maybe you couldn't get any more questions in, but I really appreciate
I am just the extra. I'm here for my handsomeness is really why they have me on the podcast.
Yes, well, I can tell that one look at you and I know it. So
And it's a compliment like that from you is probably in the Hall of Fame of compliments. That's a good.
well, and I meant it too. So anyway, you guys, thanks. It means the world that you'd open up and have me on, and let me know if there's anything more I can do for you.
Well, we appreciate it, Fred. God bless, and we'll be in touch.
All righty.